Alright, here we are, looking towards the ocean, thinking about what Ajar has been up to. Yeah, you see, we could go stop that, but unfortunately, we have other things to do. It's me, Cinn Sparksprocket here again, and we're going to cover TRP extended objects once more. I'm glad I got the profile video out of the way, because, I don't know, I think it's kind of a refresher for people, and it's not really something that people, I guess, are struggling with. So I guess we're going to get right back onto it. So the last extended items video I did, I was going to start talking about crafted items and inner objects and variables. Today we are actually going to do a video on inner objects because it will eventually lead up into crafting and then it starts getting into variables. And I figured that that would be the best way to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and click my little sample item here. I actually am using this item later on and I gotta make it into something. So I'm going to show you where you go to find your inner objects. So you click this, right? This is just a regular item. This will show you the base item. Pardon guys, sorry, I'm a little sick, which is unfortunate. But there's another thing that you can do where you can see the inner objects of something. For instance, this ruined journal, it contains an inner object. Document items have inner objects. That's what makes them work. And when you click this little plussy boy over here, document, doc, all that, you know, you can click that and see it. You can preview these things, blah, 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 blah. And that is I can't tell you what that is actually because that actually has something to do with something else. I'm not doing it. But that is how you see some of your inner objects and you kind of go into it. Now, before we really go super crazy, inner objects all have an ID with the bigger items here, the master items. Let's call them the master items. So for instance, this journal is the master item. This one is the inner object. This one still has an ID for what you have in your TRP, but this one comes included with this ruined journal. Follow the cursor. This one goes with this one. Ah, Stormwind Harbor's under attack. Oh well, not doing anything about it. I have other things to do. So with that, that kind of gives you a premise. Now, I'll talk about how exactly inner objects work here in a moment, but let's just go ahead and look at some things. We already see I've got some stuff filled out there. This is just a test item in a sense. I actually have to do more to it. I don't know if I'm going to leave it as a legendary. It doesn't really matter. Usable. Usable. Container. Now, this is one thing that is essential with inner objects. You can have containers that contain other inner objects. Kind of the best way to make those items appear in a sense, you'll actually see what I mean when I'm doing this. So if I go to my bag, right, I have nothing in this bag. Cinn has a bunch of stuff, but this is just my monk. So you do this, you double click that, and like I said, when we talked about containers and the making of containers, you can put containers in containers. That way you can add more to your bag space. And that is how you get more stuff in TRP. You can just simply go through and make another entire container that's got 20 slots, 4 slots, 8, you know, all that stuff. That is pretty simple and laid forward. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do something real quick. I'm going to right click this. And this didn't have any items, and now this has an item. This right here is considered an inner object. We're going to go up here. We're going to look at this thing right there. Boom, inner objects. We can hit container. This is just where you define containers for people that are, you know, trying to make more bags or they're running out of space. Workflows, we'll talk about that here in a moment. So inner objects. We have this item test note, new item. This test note is its ID. For instance, you get to create a new object. When you go to create inner objects, you must have the item that you're going to make the object within. So we've clicked on Muse Loot of the Mists. We've gone down to inner objects, and we click this create new object, and you know, item, document, cutscene, cancel. Let's go ahead and make another item real fast. We will call this test note 2. That is just its ID number. That is it. That ID is only really associated with this item. There is a master ID for it. You can look at them, and it's in the little. It's usually right around here. When you actually hover over them or have them selected and stuff, you will see that here in a sec. I will show you. Test note 2. New item. It doesn't look much different than the first one. I just figured I'd show you guys how to actually add that in. So you go here, and we're not going to check that, I accidentally hit that. But basically, you get the same page for creating another item, an item within an item. I mean, there's a Rick and Morty episode about simulations and simulations, but that's kind of what this is that you're making an item within an item. And I don't think that oh, look at that. Inner objects can have inner objects. You could really get pretty crazy with that. I don't recommend it because it just gets really complicated at that point. But you can, and that's nice. So big fan of that. So what we have here is we just have this empty item, and we can customize it to do all sorts of things with inner objects. And I have this loot set. When I right click it, it doesn't say anything yet because I haven't really gotten down to actually editing and making things look pretty on it, that it will spawn one of these new items. It was that first test note. So there it is. It's bam, right there. Now we're going to come back here in a sec. I'm going to use just the first test item that we have. See, I don't even think it's saved because I didn't hit save. That's why you always save your stuff. But it doesn't matter. I didn't want it anyway. So you have this, right? Now we can go ahead and just drag this. By the way, if you didn't know, you can drag and destroy. Or you can drop it. So with the usage of inner objects, let's go ahead and read this tooltip over here, this big tooltip. This actually describes it pretty well. What are inner objects? Inner objects are objects stored in a parent object. The Muse, Loot of the Mists, this loot is the parent object for this test note. Remember when I said there's a master item that these go with? You know, here's some examples. You know, you want to make a rifle with bullets to charge it. You know, rifle's a main object, bullets an inner object. Mail item for documents. Creating quests. That comes down into campaigns, which we will have to talk about. Creating quests, any item / document / cutscenes using that quest could be inner objects for this quest. In a sense, when you make quests in this game, you are making an item. And that is what comes down to campaigns, is that when you make a campaign chain, it links down to parent items, and then there's maybe some inner objects that you have working with those. For instance, a document, cutscene, telling you what to do with the quest. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but it does sound complicated. It's really not once you understand inner objects, because inner objects has something to do with crafting, it has something to do with variables. It's actually kind of the gateway to a lot of these things. The advantages of using inner objects are multiple. Inner objects data are stored inside the parent object. They are stored inside the parent object. That's going to be very important for what I'm going to tell you here in a moment. That means that they share the same version number and that their data is exchanged in the same time as the parent object data. For instance, I was talking about this item called the puzzle box back in the day, in both of these, in the past videos. The problem with my puzzle box is I didn't really understand how inner objects worked when I made them. So I'd have to transfer all the buttons to you and the puzzle box in order for it to work. Kinda stupid. Really, really whack. So now that I know, and I'm way better at this stuff, I have to remake it. But let's keep reading here in a sec. You can freely determine the inner object ID, as well as use the parent object ID as a prefix. You just can't have two inner objects having the same ID inside the same parent object. Yeah, you can't have doubles, because otherwise the system doesn't know what you want to use at that point. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Everything has to have some sort of unique ID. That way you can actually pick out what you're trying to do. Using inner objects is better performance. It is. When you have a medkit that has about 20 things in it or so, we had one at one point in the guild, and it was a really, really lovely medkit, but having to transfer all of the items at one point gets kind of heavy, and it clogs up your extended database. Whereas if they were just inner objects, you could just right-click the bag in a sense, and boom, all the items are there, and you have them all. And then it's so much easier on everybody, and it makes it a lot easier when you're just trying to hand out medkits in an IC situation. I think at the time that when we were making those things, I had no idea what inner objects were. I don't know if anybody else did. But now that we know, that's why we're here. These videos are exceptionally important. So I'm going to take a little coffee break for a moment. Yeah, I am really sick. This sucks. Sucks so bad. So let's keep going. It's easier to manage and navigate through your objects if they are stored in parent objects. Arguably, yes it is, because if you have objects that only work with certain things, you might as well have a way to just group them all together. That way you don't have a bunch of like scattered objects. Totally works. Simple. When you want to create an object, ask yourself if it wouldn't be better to have it as an inner object for another quest and all that. That comes down to campaigns. Documents and cutscenes can only be inner objects. So when you go to make a document, you have to have an object that will be with an inner object. I will go through that here in a moment too. That's another thing I will show you. I'm not really going to show you about the cutscenes because that's for campaigns. So we're going to just go ahead and cruise right through that. So let's look at this workflow for the master item, which is the loot. So we have this. You've already seen this. Usable. We already have the event links. We have it linked to a workflow. Let's look at the workflow. Now we have note spawn. This is just me kind of coming up with some things, and the idea that I have behind this item is actually going to work, and I won't have to transfer if I ever make an item like this. There will only be one of this item, but if I ever pass it around or anything, I mean, people will be able to see it a lot easier, and it won't be just this massive clutter of a file if I ever do that. So we'll go ahead and look at this. Now, when you're talking about inner objects, you can do this, and you can go here, and you can go down to the little arrow. You can see this item. You can add these items to your inventory still. Boom, there you go. That technically is an item within that parent item. However, it shares the same likeness with the loot, so it links with the parent item. For instance, I had somebody who was asking me, I want to be able to transfer containers of items with all the stuff in them to other players, and I can't do that when everything is on a different item ID. Well, you can't do that because the way that the system works is each one of those items is different and they're not linked. So for instance, if I had 20 buttons here and I tried to, I can actually show you, where's the puzzle box? There we go, I have one of these. I have a great example of why inner objects are perfect. So we have this right here. Now, it's empty. If I had 20 buttons that I wanted to actually transfer over, if I wanted to transfer the entirety of the puzzle box over, I can't do that because these items are not inner objects. The solution is not an inner object. So all of these buttons here, I have to transfer them one by one by one, and it's just a big pain in the ass when you could just make them inner objects. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just delete that puzzle box. Get out of here. Be gone. So, that is what we're talking about with this, is that you have a master item that controls certain other buttons. Now, inner objects do not function any different than a regular object. You can still do emotes. You can still do variables. You can do everything with a regular object. It is just tied to that bigger item. So now that I've said all that, and that was kind of a mouthful, we can go back to the workflows. You can see that instead of going to my inventory and adding this test item here to my bags, I have a workflow set up to just add it for me when I right click. Boom, there you go. Now you can link this sort of thing to anything. I mean, if you had a med kit that you wanted to, have, like, if you wanted to refill your med kit, you could just right click it and you have it all set up with this effect, add item. Now to get this sort of thing going, you got to go to effects, you got to add elements. We already know this part. Add item, destroy item, toggle weapon sheath, damage repair container, consume stock, blah, 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 blah. A lot of features. Add item. Now this is why the item ID thing is very important when I said you cannot have items with the same ID. Because you need to be able to link that item ID to this emote, not emote, pardon that, it's of an effect. You have to be able to do that. And that's what makes inner objects important. So, we're going to hit confirm. I don't have another item to add in there. I'm going to go ahead and make one real quick. That says nil, blah, 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 blah. We will change that here in a moment. Let's add another inner object real fast. So we're going to go ahead and we'll just create an item. We'll call it notification bell. Why not? We can totally do that, right? Now that blue text is its ID. That is what you put. Now it's easy to remember that. You can when you're making items or objects and you're making a complex chain of stuff work with a parent item. For instance, with this loot, eventually I'm going to have 20 buttons that are going to either be different chords or they're going to be different songs. And when I click them, it will do a different emote. Or if I click one, it'll go on to another thing where it's almost like I'm trying to design an in-game ocarina from like the Ocarina of Time, except it's with a loop. That's going to be a big project. I might actually film that or record that because it's going to be pretty cool to see if I can get it to work. I think I can. And that will be wonderful, and it will be pretty instructional to show with like how variables and this works. So now that we have this notification bell, we're going to go right back over here to workflows. We're going to delete you real quick. We're actually going to go back to this because we need to change this because we don't know if it looks any different. Let's just go in here after we've clicked it. Look at the top here. This is how you know you're editing the right things. The parent item, and then the new item. That notification bell. Boom. You already can see that right there. That's its ID. That ID is custom. It's tied to this item. And you cannot, if you make another item, you cannot use an Inner Ojects ID, I don't think, to do that. I will have to find out about that. Let's just assume you can't for now. So we'll call this the notification bell. That way we can see it actually work. We'll call it a rare. Bleh. Why not? We'll just leave it at that. Yeah, go ahead and hit that notification bell, everybody. So we'll hit save. We'll go back to workflows. Not workflows here though, because this is empty. We're still technically in the notification bell part. We're going to go back to the loot. You can change between these items doing this. In order to get back to where you were, you have to go click that, obviously, and then you go there. So go back to the loot. We'll look at the workflows again. We have the new item. The test item one still works. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this. We can enter the item ID as we know it, or you can hit this little button called Browse. And you hit this Browse button. It does actually work. That way I just actually proved that right. Heck yeah. Totally cool. Oh yeah, I could totally show. Oh, I could do that. I could do that. I'm going to have to tell her about that. Yeah, buddy. So back on track here. We are going to look for the notification bell. Now you can use this cool little filter thing instead of being me. And you can go right here. Now you see it has the parent item first, the notification bell. Boom. Now you have it to add one. Then it goes to add to parent container. Now this is where you want to make sure you have everything set up, right? You want to make sure that you have one going in there. This little drop down, add to parent container, it says all inventory. It'll add the items anywhere inside the entire character inventory, starting with the main container. So it'll probably put it here before it goes to here. We don't want that. We want it to go right here. So we're going to do parent container. We're going to do that, I believe. Let's look at this item real quick. Add the items only inside this item in any subcontainer. Let's go ahead and hit this item real quick. We'll see what happens. Pretty sure that's not the right one, but it might be. We'll find out. Now we'll go ahead and right click this, and it should add it. Boom, it did. So now you see we have the notification bell. We have this. So basically that is how you can get Inner Ojects to pull out of your inventory without going and manually getting them from your database. I usually do this on items that have Inner Ojects simply because it's kind of a pain if you want to drag out like 20 things or multiples of something. It just gets kind of annoying and really tedious. But with this, it will make sense why I have this like that. But that's really the gist with Inner Ojects, is that Inner Ojects works in a way where it is a part of the parent item. We've already seen that. Now, if I were to go and trade this to somebody, now it may not have these in it, or it may have them in it. I can still trade it because all of these effects, all of these items, these Inner Ojects, all of this stuff is tied in with the main item here. So by just trading this, they get access to all of these. And that is kind of what you want if you want to trade like a bundle of stuff, or if you want to trade like a package of crafting supplies. And that's what I'm gonna build as well as the loot, because by doing that, you don't have to sit there and trade generated IDs back and forth, or the item in a sense, and that's just, it's not fun. It gets kind of immersion breaking when you have to do that. So you'll just make one big old box containing stuff, and then it's going to have some other things in it, and then boom, you're totally good. And that is really the gist of what Inner Objects really is. Now, when you're starting to do crafting things and stuff like that, it doesn't function any different, because you just have the same sort of thing. You have these items that function just like regular items, but they are tied in or bound to the big item. And by trading the big item, everything, it's like a stairs. Like, you trade the top, everything else goes with it. And pretty cool. Pretty cool way to actually make like package things if you want to send them, like that med kit. I actually had somebody ask me, they need to know how to trade things with Inner Objects and to actually, get it to work. I'm going to look at that real quick. If I go to the main here, actually, let's just create an item real quick. Let's see what we got to do here. An expert item, a container item. Now, we can hit this container thing. Actually, I can go back to the main. I can go back to the. Let's remove you. I'll go back to the loot, because I just found that. Cool. So we're gonna go to this container thing right here. This is how you can configure whether or not your container works with Inner Objects and blah 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 blah. You hit this, right? Now this is where you edit it. This is where you change durability. This is where you change max weight. I don't really mess with a whole lot of these because it's just kind of a pain. Now, can only contain inner items. Marks this container to be able to contain only children items, for instance, the test item or the notification bell, which were those test items. These two, right here. Now, when you mark that, and it says right below, as for now, only containers with this option enabled can be traded while containing items. Meaning, if you have things in a container that are not considered inner items to that root object, you aren't trading it. You're not getting all of that, because they're not going to just sit there and trade a bunch of IDs over and over. It gets very complicated for the system, I suppose. I'm sure they could do that, but they just don't. And the way that they have this system right here works perfectly. So, person that asked me about that, this is what you got to do. Check this. Put what you're trying to trade as an inner item to your parent item, because if it's all in there, you can trade the entire item and they get access to all those IDs and the items actually stay. Definitely the way to go. Or you can just trade it empty with the inner object still listed, and then make a workflow where they right click it and boom, all the items show up. You can get kind of fancy like that too if you want. But this right here says you can only trade it if they are inner objects. Big old checkbox right here. This was actually something I needed to know. This was like, I just sat there one day when I was looking to redo the puzzle box. I was like, man, the puzzle box isn't working really well. What do I do to fix it? And I just looked at that and I was like, I could have made them inner objects. And then I wouldn't have to trade all those buttons all the time. And I just kind of cried a little bit, because I had spent I think I spent like 10 hours making that damn puzzle box. It was pretty ridiculous. But that is ultimately the gist that we have with inner objects. Inner objects do not function. We'll do a little recap here. Inner objects do not function differently as far as being an item or using emotes. Inner objects just are objects, but they are considered linked to the main object that you made them within. So, as a recap for a little help, you have the database. You can consider the database, a parent item. And all of these are children items. But this one, parent item and children item. So the database would almost be the grandpa at that point. You kind of get what I'm saying here, is that if you have it linked to that, you can trade that item, and all those inner object IDs and all those functions go with it. Totally the way to go. Best way to trade multiple things, especially if you're trying to send a package of stuff over. If you're trying to send onesies and twosies, link it. Just do it. 10 times easier, or just trade it. Best way to go. That really kind of covers what I have for Inner Objects. If anybody is confused or they want to see what you really can do to cruise right through and see how these work, like I said, I'm probably going to be working on the loot, and I'm going to record portions of that, or I will do it and then I will make a video talking about how I did it. And I guess the door is open if people really need me to talk about anything else with these. The next video that I have, as far as like an instructional thing, is going to be crafting, where you'll take two objects and then they combine into one. And that will be a pretty fun video, pretty informative. We actually need to have that video done for upcoming guild things eventually. I already know how to make crafted items. I will make them. It's just, it would be nice if I covered it for everybody else. If people want to just hit me up and say, hey, tell me how to make crafted items, I can, but I'm still going to make the video anyway. And as far as other content that people maybe want me to put out, I'm going to keep going with this series. We'll keep making really cool items. We'll keep covering things that are interesting and maybe complicated in TRP. The loot's going to be a big thing we cover. And I guess if anybody else has questions, eventually I have to do a campaign video. So we're working towards that. Next video I think will be crafting items, and then we'll start doing variable stuff, because variable stuff gets like into the coding part, and that's just not very fun. So with that, if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead. Let me know on the comments page. I'm actually on the House Stewards Discord and a few others. You can just hit me up there if you have to. It's not really a bad thing if you hit me up. I will sit there and chat with you and figure out what you need, and then we will get it going. So with that, if you enjoyed this content and you enjoy more things like this, or you want more things like this actually, pardon my bad English. If you like bad English as well, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ding-a-ling that bell, I guess. But other than that, I mean, take care everybody. I hope you have a good one, and get crafting.